Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow, spends her entire time in the MCU trying to repay a debt that nobody except herself believes that she owes. And yet, the moment she finally finds a family, people she loves and cares about, well, she dies trying to save them. Natasha Romanoff, played by Scarlett Johansson's first appearance in the MCU was back in 2010 in Iron Man 2. But it's not the real Natasha we see in that movie. No, she is pretending to be someone else entirely. She's undercover. And that pretty much sums up Natasha Romanoff in the MCU. She is quite literally whatever the situation requires her to be, whether it be an assistant, a spy, an interrogator, an Avenger. But who is Natasha Romanoff really? One line from the Avengers is what can be carried through the entire character arc of Natasha. I've got red in my ledger, I'd like to wipe it out. And that sums up Black Widow perfectly, whether it be in the MCU or in the comics. She is a spy running from her past. Prior to the Avengers movie, Natasha is presented as the cool, hyper-competent S.H.I.E.L.D. operative, until Loki gets under her skin, that is. It's our first look into her mind, how she views herself, and a glimpse at some of the things she has done in her past. Once again, I've got red in my ledger, I'd like to wipe it out. This line is essentially Natasha informing us of her motivations years before Endgame even takes place. She doesn't believe she can leave her old life behind, but instead believes redemption is something that has to be earned. More importantly, there's a transactional quality to the line. A ledger, of course, is accounting, good deeds on one side, bad deeds on the other. Natasha seems to believe that if she does enough good, eventually the numbers might balance out. Natasha informs Loki that Clint, Barton, Hawkeye, was sent to take her out, but instead he made a different call, which is huge. Natasha didn't escape the Red Room and instantly decide to become a hero. Someone who had every justification to get rid of her instead decided that she was worth saving. Natasha spends the rest of her life trying to prove that she deserved the chance, deserved the forgiveness for the things that she has done in her past, which of course makes their relationship in Endgame that much more devastating. The man who once saved her is ultimately the man she ends up saving. It would have been so simple for Natasha to leave the Red Room, join S.H.I.E.L.D. and suddenly become one of the good guys. But psychologically, Natasha never seems to give herself the clean slate we all think she deserves. Instead, she forces herself to remember. And in the Black Widow movie later, the line, red in my ledger, becomes uglier when we learn about Dreykov's daughter. Now, Natasha authorizes an explosion, knowing that someone could be caught in the crossfires, all because getting rid of Dreykov is more important, and any collateral damage is worth it. She believed Antonia, his daughter, had perished. So when she mentions red in her ledger, she's not talking about spy missions, they are actually people behind the red. Now, despite how Natasha views herself, she ultimately ends up surrounding herself with people who trust her implicitly, whether it be Nick Fury, Steve Rogers, Clint Barton, or the Avengers as a whole. However, Natasha continues talking about herself as though there is something fundamentally wrong with her. But it begs the question, how many people does Natasha need to save before she finally considers herself redeemed? Think about New York, stopping Hydra, helping Steve, fighting Thanos, or quite literally holding together the Avengers for 5 years after the snap. At what point can she say, I've done enough? The tragedy is, she never does. Natasha joins the Avengers believing that redemption works like an equation of sorts, that if she saves enough lives, eventually she'll make up for the ones that she took. But over the next decade, something seems to shift. S.H.I.E.L.D. is no longer her employer, the Avengers stop being her mission, and for the first time she finds something she never had, a family. Natasha's childhood family was essentially fabricated. Alexei and Melina, her parents, were playing roles, and Jelena, her sister, was the closest thing she had to a genuine family. Yet even that was taken away from her. The Red Room then ultimately brainwashes her into believing that attachment is weakness, so Natasha in turn grows up in environments where relationships are either manufactured weaponized, or just temporary. That's why the Avengers becoming a family matters so much more for Natasha than it does for the rest of the group. While the other heroes all have someone they love, the Avengers is all Natasha seems to have. Of course, there is Clint. He spared Natasha, bringing her into his life. His kids even refer to her as Auntie Nat. There is a version of her that exists outside of the hero world, and it is Clint's family that allow us to glimpse it. Now, I would argue The Winter Soldier is perhaps the most important movie for Natasha's character arc, and it's also my favourite movie in the MCU, because we see a relationship developing with Steve, despite it being platonic. Marvel dropped the ball there. I feel like they were cowards. That relationship would have been fantastic. And also, they do get together in the comics and they have a son. What's his name? James Rogers? Missed opportunity here. Now it's too late. Steve and Natasha begin as opposites. Steve is painfully sincere and Natasha is a professional liar. She spends the beginning of the film trying to find him a date, but underneath all of the banter, Steve begins to challenge her worldview. S.H.I.E.L.D. ultimately collapses, resulting in Natasha losing yet another institution she thought she belonged to, resulting in Steve asking her, "Would you trust me to do it?" And her response, "I would now." And then we enter Civil War, which quite literally destroys everything for her. She's initially in agreement with the Sokovia Accords, which does make sense for her considering she understands what unchecked power can do. However, when Steve and Bucky need to escape, she lets them. She knows she's going against the side she aligned with, which was Iron Man's side, but in that moment she makes her own moral judgment, which is drastically different from the Natasha we first met, who would simply do the job required of her. Now she will disobey the mission if she believes it is wrong. More importantly though, this is the film where we see her found family completely torn apart. Tony and Steve become enemies, Clint retires again, and Natasha goes on the run. The team is completely fractured, but despite all of this, she decides to stay with Steve. And then Thanos happens. The snap doesn't just get rid of half of the universe. For Natasha, it destroys the thing she spent her life building. The Avengers are scattered, many dusted. Clint loses himself completely after his family is snapped and becomes Ronin. Tony leaves to start his own life and have his own family. Thor loses it completely, as we know. Steve tries to help people move forward despite not being able to move forward himself. And Bruce has gone his own way. Natasha, though, she stays. She is the one trying to hold everything together. She stays in Avengers HQ, coordinating missions, essentially running what is left of the Avengers. Why? Because she doesn't know how to let go, and she doesn't have anywhere else to go. In Endgame, when Steve suggests that maybe they need to move on, Natasha tells him, "I used to have nothing, and then I got this job. This family." After nearly a decade of Natasha rarely telling us how she feels, she finally says it. The Avengers are her family, and she says it only after she has lost them. It's also worth noting at this moment that she is so far removed from the put-together, glamorous spy we're used to. She's not taking care of herself, her hair now 2 colours from not maintaining it, and she's eating a peanut butter sandwich. This is Natasha. There is no Black Widow persona. She is simply a woman trying to keep her family alive. At the beginning of Natasha's arc, her one goal was to wipe out the red in her ledger. By Endgame, that no longer seems to be her primary motivation. She's not fighting because she owes the world something. Instead, she's fighting because she finally has something she loves. Now, during the Vormir scene in Endgame, both Natasha and Clint are both trying to make the ultimate sacrifice. The Soul Stone is needed to defeat Thanos. The terms: a soul for a soul. Clint believes he is beyond redemption after becoming Ronin, and Natasha believes he deserves to go home to his family. And what is so beautiful about this moment is it almost mirrors their story. Clint once believed that Natasha's life was worth saving, and now she is returning that. Taking it back to the one line I keep referring to, "I've got red in my ledger, I'd like to wipe it out." Well, at this moment, she is presented with the ultimate opportunity to do exactly that. However, there really was nothing left for Natasha to prove. She had already spent years saving people, and this sacrifice doesn't redeem her. She had already redeemed herself long before. Vormir just simply proves that Natasha herself may never have fully understood that. My question is though, did she really need to die? That's what I'd like to know. Narratively, her death makes sense, but there is something deeply frustrating about the fact that Natasha's story ends just as the MCU finally begins exploring who she actually is. Tony's sacrifice has an enormous payoff and an even bigger funeral. I should say. Steve even gets his perfect ending, yet Natasha dies halfway through Endgame and then the story just moves on. Natasha has an incredible arc, but I truly feel that the MCU didn't allow her to own it fully. For years, she was essentially the woman of the Avengers, yet Tony got Iron Man 1, 2, and 3, Steve got 3 Captain America movies, and Thor got a franchise as well. Natasha had no solo movie until 2021, and by that point, she was already dead. The film arrived at the wrong time. That's what I believe. The Black Widow film finally explored the Red Room, Dreykov, Natasha's childhood, her relationship with Yelena, and the trauma behind the person we've been watching for a decade. But we're learning all of this after she is already gone. Imagine this had been released around Civil War. Suddenly, Natasha arrives in Infinity War and sacrifices herself in Endgame. We would fully understand everything she has survived. More importantly, we would have spent a movie with Natasha as the protagonist rather than somebody supporting character. Now, here is what angers me the most. In Endgame, Tony dies. We know this. He has Pepper with him, Peter as well. Then the funeral happens. Almost every character we've seen in the MCU stands together and mourns the loss of Tony. However, when Natasha dies, the Avengers have a short conversation by the lake. That's it. It really does upset me. It doesn't anger me that Tony gets more. It's that fact that Natasha deserved more too. That's what angers me the most. If it wasn't for her sacrifice, they would have never gotten the stones and defeated Thanos. Yes, Tony made the ultimate sacrifice too, but he would never have been able to make that sacrifice if Natasha hadn't made hers first. Worse, she isn't even there for the victory she made possible. The portals open during the final battle with all the dusted characters returning. Everyone gets a huge applause, but the one who made it possible isn't there to see it happen. Natasha helps bring everyone back, but never gets her own return. There's something painfully appropriate about that for a character who spent the entire MCU doing essential work without necessarily receiving the recognition. So did Marvel fail Natasha Romanoff? In terms of how much space Marvel gave her story, from assassin to S.H.I.E.L.D. agent to Avenger, friend, sister, and family, I would say yes. They could have done so much more with her. Natasha Romanoff spent most of her life believing she had something to make up for. From the moment we first truly get to know her, she talks about the red in her ledger, as though redemption is an equation that if she saves enough people, does enough good, eventually she might balance out all the bad. And perhaps that's what makes her ending so tragic. Because by the time Natasha reaches Vormir, there really isn't anything left for her to prove. More importantly, the woman who had spent her entire life being used by other people had finally built something that was entirely her own. She had friends, had a sister, had a family. Clint had once been sent to get rid of Natasha and decided instead that her life was worth saving. And maybe on some level, Natasha spent the rest of her life trying to prove that he made the right decision. But she already had. Natasha didn't become a hero when she jumped from the cliff. She didn't wipe the red from her ledger on Vormir. She had done that long before. And that, for me, is the real tragedy of Black Widow. She spent so much of her life trying to earn a redemption that everyone around her could already see she deserved. Natasha Romanoff didn't need to die to become a hero. She already was one. Let me know what you think of Natasha's arc in the MCU. Do you think she deserved more? Do you think she deserved to die? Do you think it should have been Clint? Obviously, we won't have that debate. I mean, I'm a it should have been Hawkeye believer, but I feel like that's a controversial statement to make. But it's mostly because Black Widow is my favorite character, and I would have even pushed Tony off that cliff, said what I said. Let me know who your favorite hero in the MCU is, or villain, and I will see you in the next video.